Hello and welcome back to the Alnwick Castle Podcast. I'm Daniel Watkins.
And I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And on today's episode, we're travelling just outside the castle walls to an area that has been associated with and connected to Alnwick Castle for many centuries.
Hulne Park has evolved from the site of medieval monasteries and forests for hunting to Georgian pleasure grounds suitable for carriage rides, to a modern working park with access for visitors to walk and explore its beautiful views and landscapes.
In this podcast, we'll be giving you a brief history of Alnwick Castle's parks, from their beginnings in the Norman period to the present day. We hope you enjoy it.
The history of Hulne Park, just west of Alnwick Castle, goes back to the 1100s and can be traced through charters, maps and other documents in the castle archives.
Like the castle, the parkland was owned in the 12th and 13th centuries by the de Vesci family. Eustace FitzJohn de Vesci, who was Lord of Alnwick Castle in the mid-1100s, founded a monastery in Hulne Park in 1147. This was probably in gratitude to the Archbishop of York, who had intervened with the king on Eustace's behalf after Eustace pledged support to the opposing side in the civil war known as the Anarchy.
Alnwick Abbey was built on the edge of the Lord's Forest, on the banks of the River Alne, which the monastery had permission to fish from. This wilderness location encouraged endurance and discipline from the monks, who lived according to a strict set of rules typical of the time.
The forest became a park in the 1200s, during the lifetime of William de Vesci. Creating an enclosed park for deer hunting was popular for many lords across England at this time, and in 1244, King Henry III gave instructions to send William 5 bucks and 10 does to stock his park as a gift of the king.
As well as using his park for hunting, de Vesci gave land to another monastic group known as the Carmelites. Barefooted and dedicated to prayer and poverty, the Carmelites of what became known as Hulne Priory were provided with a charter in the 1260s. They were allowed to take timber for building and charcoal for baking, had space to graze oxen and horses, and could gather honey and wax from the wild bees of the nearby woods. Hulne Priory was built facing Brisley Hill, which is said to have reminded their first prior of Mount Carmel in the Holy Land.
The earliest records of a head forester within the parkland date back to the same time, and suggest that a second, separate park, known as West Park, had been created by the end of the 13th century, as had a third park, College Park, mentioned in a charter from 1274.
The 1260s saw a rebellion against Henry III by the Baron Simon de Montfort, now considered one of the pioneers of the idea of parliamentary democracy in England. Alnwick Abbey appears to have established a cult devoted to de Montfort. After his death at the Battle of Evesham in 1265, his foot was taken from the battlefield and preserved at the abbey as a holy relic.
Alnwick Abbey became a place of burial for several lords of Alnwick Castle, from both the de Vesci family and the Percys, who purchased the castle and barony of Alnwick, including its parks, in 1309.
The Percy lords of Alnwick continued to establish the rights of the 2 religious houses within their parkland, as well as use the parks for hunting and sport.
Archive documents from the 1400s show the parks were a key part of the local economy during the medieval period and demonstrate how they were organised and controlled. The head forester was in charge and lived at Alnwick Castle. Each of the 3 parks, Hulne, West and College, had its own park keeper and deputy park keeper who reported to the forester. Reporting to each park keeper was staff who maintained the fences and walls, bowmen who maintained the numbers of deer, and watchmen to guard against cattle thieves. Stealing cattle was one of the main purposes of many Scottish raids at this time.
The park keepers of this century kept detailed records and accounts, which have survived today, and reveal a lot about everyday life under the Earls of Northumberland. For example, in 1448, 252 cattle were kept by the second Earl in his parks. 60 of them were taken on foot all the way down to Dagenham in Essex, where the Earl had grazing marshes, and from there they were sold at market in London.
The monks of Alnwick Abbey and Hulne Priory were not completely safe from Scottish raids. In 1488, the 4th Earl of Northumberland built the Lord's Tower at the Priory, which worked as a watchtower, a site for a beacon to warn against incoming attacks, and a place of refuge for people living within the parks. The 4th Earl, who also used the tower as a hunting lodge, dedicated it to the memory of his wife Maud.
At the beginning of the Tudor period, Alnwick Castle's parkland had a royal visitor. In 1503, the 5th Earl of Northumberland was given the task by King Henry VII of escorting his daughter, the Princess Margaret Tudor, through the north of England on her way to her marriage with King James IV of Scotland.
After the Earl initially met the princess at York and entertained her at Newcastle, the royal retinue reached Alnwick. According to one of the heralds accompanying Margaret on her journey, the Earl brought her through his park, where she killed a buck with her bow. The next day she was all the whole day in the castle, and by the Lord well cherished in her company.
By the following decade, there were nearly 1,000 deer living in Hulne Park alone, possibly one of the reasons why the 5th Earl was called Henry the Magnificent.
However, the system under which the Percy family and their parks operated changed significantly during the reign of Henry VIII. Alnwick Abbey and Hulne Priory did not escape the dissolution of the monasteries, and after rebelling against the king, the Percys lost control of their lands. Royal officials temporarily took over the parkland and its assets.
Alnwick Abbey became the possession of Sir John Forster. You can hear more about him in our last episode about the Border Reivers. From his base in Hulne Park, Forster began to take as much timber and deer as he could and furnished his residents in the abbey with items he had taken from Alnwick Castle. George Clarkson, the surveyor for the 7th Earl of Northumberland, reported in 1567 that if Forster took any more firewood from the parks, then in a few years nothing shall be left for his lordship's fire, and the want shall drive his lordship and his heirs from lying and abiding in the castle of Alnwick.
As the Tudor period came to an end, the Percy family were no longer residing at Alnwick, and the parks fell into disuse. Coleridge Park had been turned into separate plots of farming land, and West Park was no longer considered a park in its own right. In 1597, the lease for all of Hulne Park was taken by Thomas Percy, constable of the castle. This saved the park from being dismantled, at least until Thomas was killed escaping the gunpowder plot in 1605.
During the 17th century, land in Hulne Park was leased out to various owners and only used for economic purposes. Like Alnwick Castle itself, it was only restored and brought back to full Percy ownership a century later by Hugh and Elizabeth, the first Duke and Duchess of Northumberland.
In 1751, the first Duke and his gardener Thomas Cole had their first plan to restore the castle's parkland and turn it into Georgian pleasure grounds.
Huge number of trees were planted on Brisley Hill, which became one of the main attractions for carriage rides the Duchess would take through the park. One spot in particular, a cave on the south side of the hill, became known as the 9-year-old Hole. A story developed that the cave was where 3 thieves had buried their stolen treasures for 9 years, and it became so well known that even Catherine the Great was aware of it. The 9-year-old Hole was one of a series of English parkland scenes sent to the Russian empress painted on a porcelain dinner service.
The ruined Gothic architecture of Hulne Priory made it another desirable carriage ride destination. Elizabeth Percy had a list of over 90 different spots in the parkland she liked to visit. She made a garden within the cloister walls, and after her death in 1776, her husband built a picnic house that overlooked this garden as a memorial to her.
The restoration of Hulne Park took place at the same time as that of Alnwick Castle. By the 1770s, landscape designer Lancelot Capability Brown had also been commissioned by the Duke to help transform his parklands. Brown appointed a series of foremen to oversee planting of trees in the Alnwick pleasure grounds. Over 100 people were working on one of 2 planting teams at any time during this period.
Maybe the most impressive monument added to the park during the first Duke's lifetime was Brisley Tower. Another memorial to the first Duchess, Brisley Tower was designed by Robert Adam. Over 15 metres high, it was completed in 1781. The top of the tower, which provides views of the entire park, has a beacon fire, last lit to mark the Diamond Jubilee of Elizabeth II in 2012. The bottom has a Latin inscription recording the achievements made to create this new Hulne Park in the 18th century.
One area of the parkland that was not part of the castle estate at this time was the site of the now ruined Alnwick Abbey. This changed in 1800 when some of the old monastic lands were purchased by the second Duke of Northumberland. Soon afterwards, a project began to build a wall around the perimeter of Hulne Park, with local masons working every spring and summer to create the park boundaries. the building of new roads in Northumberland in the first half of the 19th century, and the division of the Alnwick Moor in the 1850s finalised what these boundaries would be.
Deer still lived in the park, though they were no longer hunted by princesses with bows. In the time of the third Duke and Duchess, who inherited in 1817, the deer were joined by a herd of Indian water buffalo. Unlike the second Earl's cattle in 1448, the buffalo were transported in wagons, from the home of the Duchess's brother in Powys, Wales, to Carlisle, and then across the country to Alnwick.
During these decades, Hulne Park was exclusively used by the Percy family and their invited guests. But after the fourth Duke inherited in 1847, he made the decision to open the park to the public. He wrote to his commissioner explaining his wish to allow Hulne Park to be open to the inhabitants of Alnwick, and Hulne Abbey should be open to all who wish. The park keeper only had to observe that no mischief is done. The Duke decided not to keep the buffalo.
The fourth Duke restored Alnwick Castle in the 1850s and 1860s, and an area of Hulne Park with a stone quarry provided stone for the restoration. Spring water from the park was also collected and channelled for the castle's water supply. The engineering firm Armstrong and Hudspeth started construction of a reservoir in 1856 for this purpose. A waterworks was built, and pipes led the water to the castle and the gardens.
In the 20th and 21st centuries, Hulne Park has continued to be cared for and is still a key part of the castle estate today. Park Farm tends to agriculture within the park walls, and a deer park still exists. After many trees fell during Storm Arwen in 2021, hundreds of new saplings have been planted. Historic buildings like Brisley Tower, Alnwick Abbey Gatehouse and Hulne Priory have been restored, and Hulne Park is still open to the public to explore.
If you would like to visit Hulne Park, public access is available during daylight hours on most days of the year. For information on any closure dates and to download some of the walks and trails available, please visit northumberlandestates.co.uk.
To find out more about the history we have spoken about today, look out for the book A History of Alnwick Parks and Pleasure Grounds by Colin Shrimpton, published by Heritage House Group.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Alnwick Castle Podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a rating or review, or send us a message on the castle's social media channels if there's a subject you'd like us to talk about.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with our final episode of 2024. Until then, I've been Deborah.
And I've been Daniel.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.